Okay, so welcome back, guys. We're back again, and just a quick reminder. In our last video, what we did was installing a Nuxt project. That is Nuxt 3 project, which is a framework built on top of Vue. Basically, what it is a full stack framework. So we installed Nuxt, and then what we did again is connecting Tailwind CSS or adding Tailwind CSS as our main styling framework. So today what we're going to do is that we are going to go through the folder structure to understand how Nuxt is organized into the folders and the responsibilities of various folders that we have in Nuxt. That is what we're going to do today. Everything that I'm going to talk about is on the documentation for Nuxt website. So while you're on the landing page here, you can just click on Docs, and that will take you to the landing page where you can click on Get Started, and here you'll be able to see everything I'll be discussing today in this video. So before we get into the agenda of today, I just wanted to let you know that Component Swap is back up and running. I just realized that 2 weeks ago we were offline. Why? Because Microsoft had deactivated my subscription, and therefore Component Swap was down. We are sorry. And so whoever reached out to ask me what was the problem, thank you for that, because I won't know. I just built it and left it there for people to use it. So thank you, Leslie. Let me just mention the name. That is Leslie. Thank you for letting me know that Component Swap is down. So guys, as we speak, it's back up and running. You can simply go to www.componentswap.com, sign up by clicking on register. If you have an account, you can simply log back in by clicking on login, then provide your email and everything. And then once you are logged in, you will be able to continue trading with your fellow students. As you can see, we have services that are being offered by various students. Also, we have products being offered by your fellow students. So what are you waiting for? Log into Component Swap, create an account, then list your services and products, and start your digital economy right in campus. So back to agenda of the day. What we're doing today is understanding the structure or the folder structure of a Nuxt application. And remember last time we had our application and we called our application Tailwind, something of the sort. Remember, this was the name of our application, that is Nuxt-Tailwind. So this is what you get when you install a Nuxt application. And remember, the only folder we created last time was the assets folder. Assets folder is where you store the assets of your project, like the CSS files, images, videos, audio files, and everything. Then something else that we created, or what we changed, was just adding the h1 tag here, which said welcome to Sequel Codes. So before I go through the folder structure, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to actually run this project. Then whatever I'm going to explain will make a lot of sense while the project is running. So how do we do that? Remember, I said we simply do, and then we do pnpm run dev, and that should start our application on the development mode. It is starting here. So while it is starting, let me start explaining the folder structure of a Nuxt application. So I'm going to go through each folder step by step to make you understand which files do you need to put on which folder, and which files, how they should be organized on your application. So our application is up and running on localhost port 3K or 3000. So I will control and click on that port so that it can open it on the browser. So it's opening it right now. While it's opening, let's just go back right here and start explaining the various folders we have here and various files that we have here. Now let me start with app.view. App.view, think of it as the main entry file of your project, the main entry point of your Nuxt project that is in the app.view. It's like the parent component of your application. So all other components will have to go through the app.view right here. This means that if I have no any other pages here, no components, and I just write anything here like h1, welcome to Sequel Codes, this is what is going to be rendered in my browser. And to confirm that, I need to come back to my browser. Okay, just a minute, it's still building. If I come back here after the build is done, we'll be able to see that we have welcome to Sequel Codes rendered. We can see right here, it's almost done building. All other components, the main component, if you have a layout, that layout will be here. If you have like pages for your application, all the pages will be right here, and you will basically define the page tags and the components, the layouts right here. So we have our app rendered already on the browser. So we have welcome to Sequel Codes. So I said everything that you write directly on the app.view will be rendered on your browser. So for example, if I come down here and add another h3 tag, and this h3 tag, I say something like this is the main or entry file. And then if I go back to my browser, I should be able to see that this is the main.entry file. And of course, we have Tailwind CSS, so you can maybe style it by saying text. No, we have to pass a class because Tailwind is a class-based utility styling a framework. So you have to pass a class and then say text center, then the color, let's say red 500, and then font bold. Since say font bold, and we should expect the changes are already reflected on the browser, and that is it. That is what we have here. Now, this is the entry file or the main component of your application. Now we have .gitignore. Gitignore, you know what it does. It simply ignores files. So if you're tracking your application like using Git and GitHub, so these files that you add inside here won't be tracked. And then we have slint. Slint is created for you automatically when you configure it during installation of Nuxt. That is if you use the Nuxt CLI. So slint basically for formatting and ensuring that your project is well formatted and it's even neat for others to understand, to even read your code. Then we have Nuxt config. Nuxt config is where you add configuration for your Nuxt project. And then we have package.json. Of course, here here we list all the dependencies and dev dependencies of your project. And then pnpm lock.yaml, this is basically auto-generated for you. You don't need to worry about this. Even if you delete it and reinstall your packages again, you will still get back your pnpm lock YAML. And remember, if you're using something like npm, you'll get npm lock, okay? And then we have readme. So readme here, you can simply add like a documentation of your project to guide someone who is coming in to contribute to your project. And then we have TypeScript tsconfig. Tsconfig, here you configure TypeScript for your Nuxt project. Now that is done. So here server, here is where you configure your API calls that uses Nuxt Nitro server. So for any API call that uses Nitro server, you will configure it in the server folder. Then we have the public directory. In the public directory, here you also have assets like the favicons. You can also have images. So what happens here? In public, remember I also said that in the assets folder, you can also have your assets like images, audios, videos. The difference is that in public, during your build process, the quality won't be changed. The file will be bundled the way it is. If it was 5 MB, you will get it as 5 MB in production. If it was 2 MB, 2 MB in production. And also, you can navigate to these assets here directly by just going like a slash, then the name of that file. The difference between public and assets is that if you have your assets in the assets folder, that is the CSS files, audios, images, during the build process where you type pnpm run build, the files will be minified to something that is optimized for web in production to ensure fast loads and even good experience when the website is now on the production hosting. When it's in the production, or live. So that is the difference between assets and public. They both contain assets, that is images, audios, fonts, and everything. And then we have here node modules. Node modules, these are like the packages or the modules that you install from npm. These are the modules that your application uses. So without this folder here, we can't run this application. We will have to install them, and then they will be installed in the node modules folder, but the actual names will be tracked in the package.json like I mentioned before. And then now we have the output. That output here is where the build versions of your app will be stored here. So if you build this, you will have here a public and a server. So if we build, we expect to get the build files in the .output directory. And inside that directory, we have a public and we also have a server. Public for the client side and the server for anything that was fetched using the Nuxt, the Nitro server, which we had it configured in the server folder. Good. Now, apart from that, you already understood what these folders and files do. Let me now introduce other folders like the pages folder and the components folder. So what I will do is to explain what pages folder is, or pages. Remember, your application or your website can have more than one page, with each page having its own file. So how you do that, you need to create a folder here in the root directory and name it pages. So inside the pages, we have index.view. So index.view is like going to the home page. So everything you define inside the index.view is what will be rendered when a user visits, for example, https localhost and then 3000. Okay, at the moment we didn't have that page, but now we have it right here. So let's see what happens when now we add the view file inside here by just typing vbase. That should give us like a shortcut to do that. I don't have that extension, so I'll just go in the manual way by having the template and then the script section too. Script section, and we are actually using setup script. And then inside here we need to add something. Let's say this is the home page, so we need a root div. Let's have a div right here. Sorry. Okay, let's have a div, and then inside here I will just mention something simple like h1 and then state that this is the home page. Okay, this is the home page. Now I said that inside the pages directory, and we have index.view file. Index.view file is basically the file that will be rendered when we have visited the home page. Coming here, we expect to have, this is the home page, but we're not having anything here. We still have the original code that we had in the app.view. Why? The moment you introduce pages into your Nuxt project, you need to come to your app directory here and then add an inbuilt component called Nuxt page. Okay, we have that. So if you have this Nuxt page here, then now if we come back to our browser, we now see this is the home page, which means it's now rendering what we have in the index.view file inside the pages directory. I hope that makes sense. Now we can remove these ones that we have here because we already made our project to have multiple pages. So what happens if I want to create, for example, a contact page? I will come to pages folder right here, create a new file, and then call it contact.view, and then I will just have the same boilerplate of a view file. Copy this, come back to contact here, and then paste. But what I will change is this is the contact page, right? Now the question is, how do we navigate to contact page? How we do that is very simple. Remember, Nuxt uses page routing. So as long as you have your file or your page inside the pages directory, you only need to navigate to the name of that file to have that page rendered. So right here we have contact.view. So for us to view contact.view, we have to come back here in our URL of the address bar here and just say contact. Okay, and then what do we have? This is the contact page. So this is what you do for everything that follows. So I will come back again and create just a new page. This page, let's call it about page. So I'll type about.view. So every page, give it a name like about.view, and in your browser navigate with the name of that file. By doing so, because Nuxt uses page routing, it will navigate to the about page and then render the content of about. So let me just press enter to confirm that, and then we will have the same component of the structure here, and then just change this from home page to about page. Now if I come back to my browser, here, I'll remove the contact here and then change that to about. All right, What do we have? This is the about page. So that is done. We are done with routing, simple like that, and how to define pages of our Nuxt application. Next is the component folder. You should make your app very modular, which means if you have reusable components, then you should design them as components so that they can be reused in different parts of your application. Now to do that, by default, components folder is not bootstrapped for you when you install Nuxt project. You simply create this just like we created the pages folder. So I will come to the root directory of my project and then create a new folder, and I will call it components, right? Components. So inside the components here, for example, a component that is common across all pages is like the header. So I'll come inside and then create a component called the header. Remember, we have a naming convention in a view. Like if a component is defined once, we use the article there, like the nav bar, the footer, or the contact button. You understand? So if I'm designing the header, I will go like the header dot view. Okay, and then we just have the view structure as normal. Then what I will say is that this is the what we call, this is the header. This is the header. So this is a component. So the fact it's a component means I can use it in different parts of the application. So I can go to pages directory, use it there. I can go to home page, use it there. About page, use it there. So let me just style it by giving it some background color, height, a width of full, so that it will be visible in other pages. So since we have Tailwind already configured, I'll just do a color of full. Maybe a height of 50 pixels is enough. 50 pixels. I can give it a BG color. BG color, BG, let's say blue. And a shade of 300 is enough, or even 400. Yep. And then text, we can give a text to be white. Okay. Font should be bold. And then we can align the text to center. Text center. Yeah, that should be enough. So if I come back to my browser, I have nothing here. Remember, just a component, but for a component, I have to call that component. Okay. Now let's start by going to the index or the home page. So I'll just call this component. So in view, you'll have to explicitly import that component, but in Nuxt, it's global. You simply call it, and that's enough. That's like calling it. So I come here and then I call the component. It's called the header. Simply like that. Remember, it's self-closing. So if I go back to home page, I expect to see the header. So if I delete contact and go back to home page like that, I should have, this is the header. Now you see, I define it once and I can reuse it anywhere. Same thing can happen to contact page here. If I come to contact page, what I'll do here, I will just come here on top and say the header. Okay. Simply like that. You don't need to import it in the script section because this is Nuxt. It's global. You just import it and that's it. So if I go back to my browser and navigate to the contact page, I'll still be able to see the header component. So let me go to contact. We still have this is the header. Now that is how you define a component and how you call that component in any section of your application. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is layouts. Now, layout is like a shared structure. A layout is a shared structure across your application. For example, we can have a dashboard layout. We can have like a layout that will always have the header, always have the footer. So before I do that, let me add one more component. Let me call it the footer. The footer.view. And then the structure remains the same. I can come right inside here. Sorry, just a minute. I created a folder instead of a file. So coming here, let me just create another component, the footer, because footer should appear in like all pages except the login and the sign up. So inside the footer here, let me paste, and then we call this is the footer. And some styling, we can be so radical here and give it a class of BG red. BG red 500, text black. Okay, then text also center. Font can be bold, we can give it a width of full. Yeah, that's it. So we have a footer and we have the header. Now that's enough for us to build a simple layout. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to all the sections where I imported the header and delete them. Then I'm going to show you how we can reuse a layout to give us a uniform structure. So coming to pages here, in the contact page, we had the header. So I'll delete the header. In the index page or the home page, we also had the header. I'll delete the header. Okay. I'll delete the header. That is it. Now, I want to create a layout that will have both the header and the footer. So what you do is come back to your root directory and create another folder and call it layouts. And then by default, the main layout that is used, you name it default.view. Default.view. And then the structure remains the same. And then instead of having this the home page, what I'll do is I will import the header here. Then I will also import the footer right here, the footer. And then I'm going to add a slot. So slot why? Slot is like we expect some child component to be injected inside right there. So a slot right there and have a div closing. Amazing. So we have slot right inside here. So let me just do that really quick. Slot. Okay, fantastic. Now what happens? We have layouts folder and then we have a default.view. So by default, our NAS application will reference the default.view file to define the layout, right? So once we have this layout, not unless you want to have different layouts, you will have to define them inside here. But with that, you'll have to also go to the meta section and tell it explicitly to use which layout. What do we expect? Now we expect that if you go to a browser, we need to see what? We need to see that we have both header. We need to have both the header and footer shown here. But we don't have that still. Why? Because we need to go back to the app.view folder here, and then we have to tell or call Nuxt layout. Nuxt layout. That is it. Copy it. That's the opening tag. Coming to the end, Nuxt layout. Okay, let me format. Fantastic. So coming back, if we refresh, good. Now you see, if in the contact page, we see this is the header, this is the footer. If we go to home page, which is the index, we still have this is the header, this is the footer. Again, if you go to about us, about, we still have this is the header, this is the footer. Now let's see what we have done. So what we've done is created a layouts directory. Inside that layout directory, we have a default.view file. And then in your app, which is the root file or the entry file, you have to wrap all the components with a Nuxt layout tag, which is inbuilt. And also for the pages, you have to create a pages folder here, and inside that folder, define all your pages. Now your pages files should have the page names. For example, if you want to create about page, call it about.view. If you want to create a contact page, call it contact.view. You don't need to configure something like routing because Nuxt employs page routing. So if you navigate to /contact, we'll render the content of contact page. And once you have or introduce pages folder, you have to also call Nuxt page, which is inbuilt component in Nuxt. With that, it will know how to render those pages. And then what's important again is the components. For all your reusable components, create a components folder and then define all the components inside there. So you define once and use everywhere. And then of course we have the public for assets. We also have assets for assets. We have the output for your build files. We also have node modules for your npm packages, layouts for your layouts, server for your API calls that are using Nitro server, and then we have slint for formatting and pretty code, and we have Nuxt config for configuration of Nuxt. If you install modules, you have to configure them right here. We have package.json for tracking our dependencies and dev dependencies, and we have package lock and TypeScript configuration. So that's it for this video, and I hope you learn how Nuxt is architectured. Now, thank you for watching this video. See you in the upcoming videos. Osego Codes signing out.